Alright, so this is going to be one of a rant that I've been wanting to do for some time. This rant is a Star Wars rant, and I gotta start with this. I'm a massive Star Wars fan. I love everything about the original trilogy, the prequels, even, and many of the things that Disney has done with the franchise since they took it over. I'm gonna have a separate video of the things that I think Disney has done right, but there is something in particular that Disney has not done right, and among a rather large list of mistakes that I think they have done with the franchise, nothing sticks out more than what I will consider to be the dumbest decision that has ever been conceived in the Star Wars universe. And that is Starkiller Base. If you guys have seen my previous video, you know that I've already said that I have a problem with Starkiller Base. And this rant is all about why I have a problem with Starkiller Base. Okay, so Starkiller Base is actually a very important plot point for a lot of different reasons. So there's actually a level of importance that goes into... you can't just brush Starkiller Base aside like it doesn't matter. No, actually, Starkiller Base matters for a very specific reason. So we're going to start with that. Starkiller Base is important because it is the reason why the Resistance is now fighting at a disadvantage with the First Order. If it were not for the fact that Starkiller Base wiped out in one solid stroke the entire Republic fleet and the Senate and their hierarchical government structure all at once, we wouldn't be in a situation where the rebels seem to always be fighting, or the resistance always seem to be fighting from a disadvantaged point. That was one of the things that made the rebellion in the original trilogy fun, is because they were rebelling against this greater military force. In this sequel trilogy, you have to remember, the Republic won that war. The Battle of Jakku was the big turning point that led to a signing of a treaty, and none of this is, by the way, in the movies. It's all done on side, book stuff that you have to read in order to understand context for some of the things going on in the sequel trilogy. So, the Starkiller Base is the way that the storytellers are allowing the First Order to once again take advantage and provide real conflict to the storyline. So, Starkiller Base is important. If Starkiller Base doesn't exist, there is no reason for the First Order to be this dominating military threat that they seem to be in Episode 7 and 8. You wouldn't get this the Resistance is constantly outnumbered and we're fighting a giant planet with 30 X-Wings because that's all we have. You wouldn't get there if it wasn't for the fact that Starkiller Base sets up the story so that the First Order now all of a sudden is in an overwhelmingly advantaged position. So, you can't just brush Starkiller Base aside, you guys. You can't. So then, let's get into Starkiller Base for a second. Starkiller Base is a fucking terrible idea. It doesn't make sense within the confines of this world. Okay, I know. Star Wars has a lot of really fantasy elements to it, like the fact that the Millennium Falcon can fly across the galaxy at the rate that it does, or that lightsabers are basically impossible if you're using normal physics, or even the magic of the Force. But within this story, there are rules and kind of conventions that need to be understood. So let's start with this one for a second. This is the big thing that anyone who's paid attention at all in Star Wars can kind of at least point to. Starkiller Base doesn't make sense because the First Order is a dissident remnant faction of the former Empire. And Disney digs themselves their own grave with this one, because it's okay, you're making all of these references and you're telling this like really intricate story of how much the Empire did to keep the Death Star a secret and what they had to do to actually build the damn thing. Like they had to kidnap, scientists from all across the galaxy. They wiped out the entire Geonosian race because they were building it above Geonosis. They did all these different things to make, using all of the vast resources that the Galactic Empire had access to, in order to construct a weapon that was able to travel through hyperspace and destroy a planet. And yet, the First Order, being a defeated dissident faction of the former Galactic Empire, is able to construct something 10 times as complicated, 10 times as powerful, with less than a third of the resources that the Empire had access to. They never explain how how this could ever possibly be possible. Constructing the Death Star was difficult. It was really difficult. It was really difficult keeping it a secret even. How did the First Order how could the First Order ever possibly construct something like Starkiller Base without the Republic, who is now the dominating military and governmental facility in the galaxy? How did they not discover that this was going on? That point is never even like slightly explained. You're just supposed to gloss over the fact that like, oh, all of a sudden the First Order now, even though they've got all these other different weapons, but they have something that like the Empire, that Emperor Palpatine and Darth Vader schemed for years to build, and all of a sudden now they've got something when 30 years later that is just this much more powerful, that can do all of these different things that the Death Star never could do, but somehow no one ever noticed the fact that they were building this thing in the first place. So then, okay, it doesn't make sense they could build this thing in the first place. It really doesn't. It doesn't make any sense at all that they could do this. But now we're going to get into what this thing actually does. This weapon is able to fire a beam of concentrated solar energy from a star that it sucks and absorbs into. More on that in a second. Across the galaxy using hyperspace lanes, and is able to, with pinpoint accuracy, hit planets from clear across the galaxy. Like, you have to look at like the map of the galaxy to understand how ridiculous this is. And perhaps when I publish like a second version of this video, I'll give you like a graphic of how this works. The Hosnian system is a core world, which means it's one of like the center planets of all of the gigantic clusters of stars that make up like the main populated worlds of the galaxy, including Coruscant, Alderaan, Naboo, and a bunch of others. These are considered core worlds because they exist within this big, large cluster of stars at the center of the galaxy. And then you look where Starkiller Base was actually built. It's built on this fringe section of the galaxy, as almost as far away as Tatooine is, and somehow it's able to fire this weapon from clear across that galaxy with a single trajectory that is able to, with pinpoint accuracy, hit all of the planets that are housing the majority of the Republic fleet and destroy them all at once. Somehow this weapon is able to do that. It doesn't even, like, you have to go back to, the original Star Wars to give you some context for why that is so unbelievable. Without the proper calculations, you can fly right through a star. This is Han Solo describing the intricacies of hyperspace for a ship that can maneuver through hyperspace. This weapon fires a beam of intense cosmic energy across the galaxy in a straight line and is somehow able to vaporize a planet from that far away in seconds from firing it. Now, let's get to one of the most ridiculous parts of everything that I've said so far, because as ridiculous as what I've already just talked about, this part is the most ridiculous of all of it. So our exposition as viewers into Starkiller Base is that we watch the First Order line up like, fascist troops to watch this weapon fire, and then we are expected to believe that Finn and Han Solo and the other people on this other planet are watching in real time, as though they were watching television in the sky. They were watching these beams of light come across the sky and hit these different planets in a different solar system in a different part of the galaxy. Dude, look in a fucking telescope. You can't do that. Light travels at a certain... Even if it was possible that this weapon could travel as fast as it does, you would never be able to see it happen, because it happens at the rate that light travels. It takes 8 minutes for our own sun to for the light from our own sun and our own solar system to hit our planet. You're telling me that we're supposed to believe that across the galaxy, in a different solar system, these people are able to watch in real time as 4 planets are destroyed? Planets, not stars, planets. How is that ever possible? Like, you would never be able to do that. The amount of light that it would act, and it happened in daytime, to make it even more ridiculous. We're supposed to believe that this is something that you could actually believe, that Finn is going to look in the sky and say, "It was the First Order. The First Order did it." There's no possible scientific way that could ever happen. And even within the confines of the fantastical Star Wars universe, hyperspace doesn't work like that. You are traveling faster than the speed of light in order to get the Millennium Falcon to go as fast as it does across huge distances. There's no way you could visibly see optical light from that far away, destroying something that doesn't produce enough light for you to see it in the first place, much less during daytime. Am I the only one here that noticed how dumb and unbelievable that was? And yet this is a central core point to the whole storyline in episode 7. This was the reason why Finn all of a sudden decided to start fighting. This is his huge turning point where he became the motivating factor for him to become a redeemable character. And it's based off of something that's complete lunacy. Lunacy! In a universe where you can move shit with your mind and you can travel across vast quantities of star distance in hours, this is somehow more unbelievable than anything else. Okay. Now that that's been established, let's ask a couple of other questions here for... just to, provide some sense of plausibility for how Starkiller Base could ever be a thing. Okay, so the Death Star was built as a gigantic space station the size of a small moon. Starkiller Base is seemingly constructed into the existing infrastructure of an already existing ice planet. And presumably it uses the planet's own magnetic field in order to generate, part of what it's able to do. Well, now I have a question for you. They were planning on firing this weapon twice over the course of episode 7. And they presumably use the star-sucking power of this major gun in order to suck their own sun into and use it as the fuel for the weapon. Well, how did they get to the second star? That's my main question here. Starkiller Base is a planet. It's not a space station. It doesn't have its own propulsion power. You're trying to tell me that they were somehow able to attach a hyperdrive to something the size of a planet without compromising its organic integrity? What? The reason why the Death Star is a space station is because it needs to be able to move. That was the whole point of this damn thing. And here's the other thing, too. Starkiller Base, let's skip the obvious here. Starkiller Base was Disney's attempt to up the stakes on the entire point of episode 7 is that they're just retelling episode 4. But we want to make sure the audience is involved and that they care. So what we do, and even some of the people comment on it in a fourth wall way, they're like, "Oh, you thought the Death Star was bad? Look at this picture of Starkiller Base and look how much bigger it is than the Death Star. Like, this was Disney's cheap attempt to get people to care about the story, because all of a sudden now this weapon is so much worse than before. You have to actually believe that it's possible. Without, the second you you think about it for a second, all of a sudden you're like, wait, that weapon's like completely stupid. Why? Like, this is like bad comic book levels of stupidity. Like, we may as well be dealing with like the cosmic being Galactus at this point. It would make just as much sense in the Star Wars universe as this damn thing does. Okay, so we have that. We're like, they just expect us to believe that this is going on. But here's the thing. Part of the reason the Death Star was built, actually even more so than the main reason, and I'm disregarding this new canon bullshit from Battlefront 2. I don't believe in that whole Emperor is trying to exterminate the entire population of the galaxy nonsense that game tried to push on us. That shit doesn't make any sense. The reason the Death Star exists is because the Death Star is supposed to be a symbol of fear. They fire the weapon once, and they were planning on firing it again to destroy the rebel base on Yavin, but it was meant to be a symbol of fear. Even like the first commander that you interact with on the Death Star says it. It's a symbol of fear. Grand Moff Tarkin says it. We don't need the Senate anymore. The planets will be submissive because they are afraid of what we're able to do. That's the reason the Death Star needs to be so big and so ridiculous. It's because it is a symbol of the power of the Galactic Empire. The way Starkiller Base works, Starkiller Base fires its lethal weapon from across the galaxy with no one having any idea where it comes from. And the thing is, too, if you take into consideration the technology that is available in the Star Wars universe, there are easier and more efficient ways to wipe out entire populations of planets. And this is my main thing about Starkiller Base. You could have written a story that was way more believable, had way more opportunities for you to not just recycle a previous plot point. And you could have done it better by just being a little bit more subtle and creative with what you were doing. So let's take a step back for a second. There's something fundamentally different about the First Order from the Empire. The Empire was supposed to be the governing body of the galaxy following the Clone Wars. The First Order is a glorified galactic terrorist organization. And because they are now the military underdogs, that allows them to implement tactics that the Empire never would, because the Empire would never be caught dead trying to do stuff that's going to destabilize order. The First Order's main concern is just causing fear and death. Okay, well, there's other ways you can destroy a population of a planet if all you're trying to do is kill people. You ever heard of introducing a biological weapon in a biosphere of a planet that could just, introduce a rapidly contagious disease that can just wipe out a planet within, a couple of days? That's way easier than building, a huge, gun into a planet that fires something ridiculous from across hyperspace. Have you ever thought about maybe, using a lot of the technology they have to even Starship Troopers levels of technology where you fling a gigantic asteroid into a planet? That will kill everybody on it just really, really easily. Have you thought about, maybe using politics? Here's the thing. The way that Episode 7 is set up, if you follow the encyclopedia that goes along with it, that none of this stuff is ever in the movies. The reason why Leia Organa has a resistance, her own private army that's not related to the Republic, is because politically, war with the First Order is completely non-popular. People are tired. They were tired of the Galactic Rebellion by the time by the time the treaty was signed. No one wanted to continue this war with a force that was now considered not a real threat. So, you know what you could have done? You could have made this whole political, plot point where the First Order is now trying to frame public support against Leia. Now, granted, that would be a lot like what Palpatine did in the prequel trilogy, but it would be a hell of a lot more compelling than what they actually ended up doing. It's just lazy, unbelievable storytelling. And what The reason why it's so important is because you can't have the sequel trilogy be what it is without Starkiller Base's importance. Without Starkiller Base, the Republic still has a fleet. The Republic still has a military force that can contest the First Order. And by the time you get to Episode 8, it seems like the entire Resistance army is like 50 people versus a First Order army that's got dozens of ships and like dozens of AT-AT walkers and hundreds of TIE fighters. Like, there, you don't have any of the same believable drama without first erasing what you did in the original trilogy. It's the same thing that it's the same clean slate that JJ Abrams achieves in the his 2009 Star Trek movie. Okay, none of the stuff that mattered in the other movies matters anymore because all of a sudden this Romulan comes back through time and kills Kirk's father. Now everything changes. Oh no, now we're going to drop some dark matter into Vulcan, and now like Vulcan's gone, so we have this whole timeline where Vulcan no longer exists. It's just as ridiculous. It's even more ridiculous. Because at least in Star Trek, you have an established sense that time travel is a thing and that it's possible. There is nothing about Starkiller Base that is consistent with anything that has been built up to it at this point. You could have told me that Snoke was, a cosmic being that could destroy planets with the Force, and it would have made just as much sense as Starkiller Base does. So, I hope that this rant has provided enough evidence for you to agree with me that Starkiller Base is the worst idea that has ever been in the Star Wars universe. And the more that I think about it, the more I contemplate on it, the more that I understand that Starkiller Base, the worst idea that's ever been in the Star Wars universe, is a basis for what the sequel trilogy actually is. And so now I am at a point where I'm like, well, if the entire plot of the sequel trilogy revolves around this really stupid idea, there's no way the sequel trilogy can ever be redeemable. I hope I'm wrong. I really do. I want episode 9 to be better than episode 8 or 7 were. But honestly, like, how do you make up for the sin that is Starkiller Base? I don't have that answer. Maybe JJ Abrams does. I can't believe that he ever signed on directing a movie where this was a thing in the first place. I hope he got paid well for it. Because that's the only reason I would ever think someone with any shred of integrity would do it. That's my rant. If you guys want to downvote me for being such a hater, go right ahead. Doesn't mean I'm wrong. I'll see you guys next time.